Month Roundtable on Black Voices and Experiences in National Security and the Foreign Service. We extend our welcome to former Ambassador to Malta, Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, Ambassador in Residence at Howard University, Ambassador Larry Palmer, who will be joining the call as soon as he can, and former USAID Acting Administrator, the Honorable Alonzo Fulgham, and former Peace Corps Director, the Honorable Aaron Williams. If you are not a panelist, their staff, or a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, please disconnect from this call. This call is being moderated by House Foreign Affairs Committee majority staff. All participants are currently muted by the moderator. You can unmute yourself when it is your turn to speak by tapping your screen and then tapping the microphone icon that currently has a line through it. Please remain on mute until you are called on to speak by the moderator. The format of the call is as follows. First, Chair Meeks will give opening remarks, followed by Ranking Member McCall. Chair Meeks will then introduce our panelists and recognize them for their presentations. After their presentations, we will turn to questions first by Chair Meeks and Ranking Member McCall. Finally, the moderator will call on members of the committee who have questions in seniority order, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. To remain respectful of everyone's time and due to the high interest in this briefing, we will be limiting questions to 3 minutes per member. The video user named Angel Griffin shows a clock, which you can see by going to the layout option in the top right corner of the screen and choosing Grid View. Ahead of this briefing, staff were asked to let us know if members would like to ask questions. The moderator will call on a list of members who let us know they had a question ahead of time. If at any time a member would like to ask a question whose staff did not contact us ahead of time, you can use the hand raising function on WebEx to be added at the end of the list. If you are connected by phone and would like to be added to the question list, please have your staff contact Ashley Borneo. Chair Meeks will now begin with his opening remarks.
Thank you, Raven. And thank you all for joining us for a Black History Month Roundtable event on Black voices and experiences in national security, and particularly the Foreign Service. As we build back our national security programs and our diplomatic corps, it is crucial that we prioritize diversity and have that workforce look like America. It's like the America that they represent and who we are. The lack of diversity in national security has been and continues to be a systemic problem and was compounded as the State Department and our national security organization saw a significant decrease in diversity and representation over the past 4 years. And we simply can't go back to where we were 4 years ago. We have to go back further than that, because even prior, we were not where we should be. So we not only do a disservice to minority Americans when we exclude them from a seat at the decision-making table, but we also hurt ourselves on the global stage when we fail to utilize and promote diverse talent and perspectives. As we re-engage on the global stage, we must also consider connections that extend beyond our traditional allies and partners and Eurocentric leanings. The U.S. should leverage the strong relationship that exists among the African diaspora and tap into the cultural bonds that exist in so many minority communities across our nation, bonds that extend beyond borders. And we cannot discount how powerful a message it is for America, whose founding fathers owned slaves, to have a prominent Black Americans representing it abroad. It demonstrates America's most powerful diplomatic tool, our story of a nation committed to forming a more perfect union with equality and justice for all. So this roundtable is part of an ongoing conversation and work on our committee on how we diversify and make sure that we are talking about diversity, inclusion, and accountability in this Congress. And I especially want to thank Ranking Member McCall for working with me and putting this briefing together and co-leading it. This indeed is a timely and important conversation. And I now yield back my time to Ranking Member Michael McCall.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my good friend, Chairman Meeks, our new chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I think we're off to a great start working together, doing what's best for the country. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the special roundtable for Black History Month. Greg knows that I share his belief that America's national security apparatus needs to reflect America in all of its diversity. And that includes diversity of skin color, of gender, and of backgrounds. It also includes diversity of thought. As Peter Thiel has said, quote, diversity of ideas is to be valued, but you don't have to have real diversity when you have people who look different and think alike. At the United States State Department, I know certain steps have been taken in recent years by the Office of Civil Rights and the Bureau of Global Talent Management. And I'm very pleased that the new Secretary Blinken has made diversity a seventh floor priority. I appreciate all the good work various affinity groups are doing, as well as people like Woshui Barrera, a senior advisor in GTM. Many of these efforts were given priority under the Trump administration. Senior officials like Director General Carol Perez has led the way, even coming to the Capitol Hill last fall to testify about the state's efforts. But of course, there is always more that can be done. As Chairman Meeks noted, last year's GOA report found that certain long-standing programs like diplomats in residence and the Pickering and Rangel fellowships have been successful in attracting qualified minority candidates to join the Foreign Service. But that report also found the proportion of racial and ethnic minorities among the civil service has decreased, and I believe that is unacceptable. Unfortunately, it's also found the State Department was less diverse relative to the rest of the federal workforce. And I know Chairman Meeks and I will be working on this. Most relevant to today's roundtable, the proportion of American or African Americans at the state has fallen slightly. Among the senior staff, the absence is especially pronounced. So today I'm here and my staff are also signed on to listen and to learn from the distinguished panelists. They are the successors of the African American trailblazers like Ebenezer Bassett, Clifton Wharton, Edward Dudley, and Patricia Roberts Harris, all who made American diplomacy stronger and more representative of our nation. As Robert Kennedy said in 1968, after America lost Martin Luther King, he said, quote, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion towards one another and a feeling of justice towards those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be Black. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I join with you in welcoming our panelists, and I thank them and you for your exemplary service to our nation, and I yield back.
Thank you for that gracious statement. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. They are dynamite. First, we have former Ambassador to Malta, the Honorable Gina Abercrombie Winstanley. Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley was the longest serving ambassador to Malta and is a champion on increasing diversity and national security, in addition to her foreign policy expertise. Next, we have former USAID acting administrator, the Honorable Alonzo Fulgrim. Mr. Fulgrim was the first USAID Chief Operating Officer and the first Black administrator at the agency. Mr. Fulgrim has championed numerous humanitarian and development programs, including successful reconstruction efforts in Afghanistan, and over the span of more than 30 years in public service. Next is the former director of the Peace Corps, the Honorable Aaron Williams. Mr. Williams is Senior Advisor Emeritus at RTI International and an adjunct professor of health policy and management at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill at the Gillen School of Global Public Health. He was the first Black director of the Peace Corps from 2009 to 2012 and has been a senior official at USAID. Also, I know he will be joining us soon, is Ambassador Larry Palmer, who is not only a close personal friend of mine, who has done a lot of work, but he is the ambassador in residence at Howard University. And in addition to being an expert on US relations in Latin America and the Caribbean, he, as I said, is a person that I've leaned on a number of times during my career. So beyond multiple ambassadorships in the Western Hemisphere, Ambassador Palmer also served as the president of the Inter-American Foundation, and I know that he will join us soon. So I understand that, well, I'm gonna turn it over to Raven because she may be able to see first in the order of which they should speak because of technical issues. Raven, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Chair Meeks. We're first going to start with Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley's presentation. Ambassador, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I hope you all can hear and see me. I was having a few technical difficulties as well. The joys of remote. I'm delighted to participate in this roundtable. I'm hoping for a great discussion of some of the challenges that have been facing us. I know that we are at an inflection point. We have been talking about improving diversity, improving inclusion in foreign affairs in general, and certainly in the Department of State since, frankly, before I became a Foreign Service officer over 30 years ago. I want to say that we have admired the problem for many years, but it seems that we're in a really special moment now where we have so many willing to concentrate on actually making real progress on this issue. We have an opportunity with the support of Capitol Hill, with the leadership that we have in the department now. I think that we're going to be able to make great progress. I was looking recently at a new exhibit that's in the Museum of Diplomacy on Edward Dudley, who was the first Black ambassador to have the full title of ambassador, and he served in Liberia in the late 40s, early 50s. And as I read about him, I was thunderstruck by reading that he was taking up with the Department of State the issue of African Americans in the Department of State being confined to African posts alone and Haiti, and that African Americans came into the department as well resourced and credentialed as our white colleagues, ready with languages and travel and experiences to serve all around the world, and yet we were confined to this narrow slice of the international sphere. And that with his advocacy, he was able to see that Black diplomats were serving in different places, including Europe and Latin America. And I thought, my goodness, this was a discussion that was happening when I came into the Foreign Service in the late 80s, that we were talking about Black ambassadors being confined to Africa and the Caribbean. And I thought about Terrence Todman, a career ambassador who came in with Chinese, Asian languages, Chinese and Japanese, and yet his service certainly began in Africa as well. So this is something that the department has struggled with, and it is really time to make concrete steps forward. I was also talking the other day about Tiana Spears, that I know a number of us have become aware of some of the experiences she had in crossing an international border and being stopped by fellow Americans because she didn't look like a US diplomat. And that I'd had similar experiences in my time. But when I came up, we were told to keep our heads down, stay silent, focus on the job. Your good work will be recognized. This isn't something that you complain about, you just power through it. When I was coming through an international border in one of my earlier postings, and the military who personed the border stopped me every time, even though I had diplomatic plates, I had a diplomatic passport, and they would hold me while my European colleagues were driving past me going to do their reporting work, and others were driving past me, and I would be stuck at the border until one soldier said to me, "You don't look like an American diplomat." And I knew what he meant, and he smirked at me, and he knew I knew what he meant, which was I did not have the right skin color for an American diplomat. My experience was to go back to the embassy and complain about it. And in the end, the DCM did raise it with the host nation. Tiana's experience was worse, quite frankly, because those who were questioning her were her fellow citizens. And I just know how painful that can be. And again, with the attention of all parties concerned, this is the time where we can make a real difference. I am hoping that there will be a great deal of support for getting the data, being able to slice and dice it so we see where we are, where the hurdles are. Because we've known about the challenges, we've really got to dig deep, and we have to hold people accountable. So any real success, I believe, is going to require intentionality, transparency, and accountability. And it's one of the challenges within the department that the accountability is so diffuse in different places that it really does not exist. It's easy for it to be passed on to someone else, or an excuse, press of business here, or you had to get someone to an assignment there, that keeps real progress from being made. So an important step forward, in my view, will be intentionality, transparency, and accountability. And I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your remarks. We are still waiting for Ambassador Palmer to join the call, but we'll turn it over to Mr. Fulgham for his presentation. Thank you. Mr. Fulgham, you'll need to unmute your microphone so we can hear you.
Chairman Meeks and Ranking Member, thank you for this opportunity to speak to the committee today. As many of you know, the U.S. has always been inspirational to other countries because of our institutions and our checks and balances. And I agree with Ambassador Abercrombie, Ed Perkins. I think about the time he was sent to Pretoria, South Africa in 1982 and 83, the first Black ambassador to South Africa. The world was watching, and he served, I think, with distinction and admiration during that period. I also think about, and also Ambassador Perkins just left us recently, so God bless his soul, excuse me. But Ambassador Terrence Hodgman as well, another one who has become the first career ambassador for the State Department. His first ambassadorship was to Portugal, a non-African speaking country. He was told in his career that he wouldn't be an effective ambassador because of his West Indian accent, but he continued to persevere and become one of the best ambassadors, career ambassadors the State Department has ever known. The conflict is always within our careers. We face that throughout. My first assignment to Tbilisi, Georgia in the Caucasus is where I faced the first time I had overt racism. I had one of my ministers who didn't want to shake my hand, and I couldn't figure out why. And we finally got together and had a conversation. And he told me privately after a few Georgian tables that the reason that he didn't want to shake my hand because he thought I was from one of the Black exploitation films that America had shown, and that America was starting to send its worst to represent them in Georgia. He further went on to talk about some of the things that he had learned about Black Americans only through video, and I was the first one that he'd ever met. And simultaneously after I had arrived there was a newspaper article with a satire, I'll say the least, of a Black person in blackface, and they ran an article. Well, the U.S. ambassador at the time, actually the chargé, was livid. He called the editor in to his office and told him that Alonzo Fulgham is one of our best officers and that we will no longer tolerate things like this being written. A few days later, they printed a retraction. Those are the kinds of things that we face in the Foreign Service. And we go through this on numerous occasions throughout our careers. But at the end of the day, I always look back at Ed Perkins and Terrence Todman as giants who all taught us that they did it in a time where there wasn't advocacy. There weren't opportunities to be able to have the recourse that we're having today. And I agree with Ambassador Abercrombie that we are moving in the right direction. The State Department, as well as USAID, has to do better in identifying opportunities, similar to what Larry Eagleburger did back in the 70s and the 90s, when he was being beaten up by committees just like this about his inability to have more African Americans and people of color in the front offices. So Larry Eagleburger made an edict. He said, basically, there will be every front office in the State Department will have a person of color or a woman as a dash. Those are the kinds of edicts that were put forth and created more opportunities for people like Ambassador Abercrombie and Ambassador Palmer. And I think those are the kind of things that have to be advocated for to create an opportunity for more minorities to move within the system. So with that, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for your remarks. We'll move on to former Peace Corps Director Aaron Williams for his presentation.
I believe I'm unmuted, Raven, correct?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Chairman Meeks and Ranking Member McCall and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today and to share with you my views and experience on serving in the foreign affairs arena. I'm also delighted to be on a panel with my distinguished colleagues, each of whom has dedicated the majority of their professional careers in service to our nation. I served as a U.S. Agency for International Development Foreign Service Officer for 22 years as both a mission director and senior official at headquarters. I've worked in every region of the world. I served in leadership positions at both USAID and, of course, as director of the Peace Corps. And it's always been a distinct honor to represent the United States. As an African American, I am a direct beneficiary of the civil rights movement and stand on the shoulders of those who sacrificed their blood, sweat, and tears in fighting for the monumental changes that open up opportunities for Black and Brown people across our country, and specifically in the U.S. Foreign Service. These giants would include distinguished diplomats that my colleagues have already mentioned, Ambassador Ed Perkins and his pioneering work in South Africa, Terrence Todman, who broke so many barriers. People of today, Ruth Davis and Johnny Carson, all legendary ambassadors at the State Department. However, despite these advances, structural inequality persists as the progress made over the past 60 years still do not solve the fundamental problems faced by people of color. And last year, of course, we saw this tsunami of outrage, both in the United States and overseas, as waves of multi-ethnic and multi-generational protesters marched for justice and against inequality. To this point, once again, we must call on the U.S. Foreign Affairs agencies to rise to this challenge and seize this moment to demonstrate leadership in pursuing broad-based policies and programs that will promote diversity and social justice in both headquarters and also in our embassies around the world. We have to invest in the diverse human capital of the future, and that will reflect the true face of our country. As has been widely reported in the media and discussed broadly within the foreign policy and national security community, one thing is clear, and I quote, "The failure to diversify senior positions in our foreign affairs agencies undermines U.S. credibility abroad." Based on my experience and as widely articulated by diversity experts, I think the most important components in promoting diversity in the agencies is to focus on at least 4 areas. First, to gain an understanding of the diverse groups in our country, to provide mentoring and sponsorships opportunities, create a pipeline of candidates, and provide opportunities for growth and promotion within the agencies. Personally, when I went overseas for the first time to my first assignment in Honduras with USAID, I, of course, was the first Black person to show up in that position as a project development officer. And I met resistance in the Honduran community. But I did get support from my colleagues, and I received good mentoring and opportunities by my supervisors to move forward. But every time I went to a different post in Latin America, and I spent most of my career in Latin America, except for my last assignment as director of USAID in South Africa during the Mandela administration. But every step of the way, I often accounted for or had to deal with resistance. And it's something that is part and parcel, as my colleagues have mentioned, of everybody's experience as a person of color in the Foreign Service, because people don't expect us to represent America, because that's not what America portrays as its workforce overseas. So that's got to change. I think this opportunity to speak to you today is a step in the right direction. I look forward to continuing our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks, and thank you so much to all of our participants. Unfortunately, Ambassador Palmer won't be joining us today, so we're going to move on to the question and answer. So Mr. Meeks, if you would like to start with your question, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our distinguished panelists. Your testimony was very informative and powerful. So, you know, the question is that throughout my period in Congress, I know that there's been various programs that's supposed to be promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion at state and USAID. Yet, as indicated, the proportions of minority groups remain low, particularly at the mid to senior levels of employment, as well as the question of retention, because I've also heard often about individuals who feel that they're in a situation where they leave because of the culture that surrounds them. So my question to all of you is, what steps can state and USAID take to hold senior leadership first accountable for DEI initiatives and curbing systemic racism? And what kind of policy should be put in place for the retention of senior level individuals at state and USAID? And what other suggestion would you think that we should be doing on this committee or in Congress to make sure that that becomes a reality, to work to hold folks accountable? I'll start with Dr. Let me start with Ambassador Fulghum.
Mr. Fulghum, we'll need you to unmute your microphone so we can hear you.
Chairman Meeks, thank you for that promotion, but I am not an ambassador, but I am honorable. I appreciate that. Listen, Ambassador Meeks, this conversation has been going on for a long time, as Ambassador Winstanley mentioned earlier. I think until we start to hold the leadership in these organizations accountable, meaning that metrics, asking the right questions when the administration starts, looking at promotions, looking at criteria that's been put in place for bonuses within these agencies, and also how they're promoting people. Those questions have to get answered, and not in the first year, but in the second year and the third year. And I think what happens a lot of times is that we always blame the political appointees, but the problem really lies at the working level, at the senior levels within those organizations. And I think we have to make sure that there's professionalization within those jobs and the head of HR. I think we need chief diversity officers that will report to maybe potentially you once a year to let you know how that process is going. And also we've got to do a much better job of recruiting at the high school and college levels. Sending, and not just at Howard and at Morehouse and at Spelman. There's Hampton Institute, there's North Carolina A&T, Morgan State is building a real powerhouse. We've got to be more inclusionary about the conversations that we're having to encourage young people to want to be a part of the Foreign Service and understand what it is. Unlike many of my colleagues on this call, I learned about the Foreign Service through, guess what, Jet Magazine. And young people on here, I'm not talking about a jet plane, I'm talking about a magazine that informed us about how we were doing in various parts of the world and the Foreign Service and other public service opportunities. And I was always intrigued by some of the stories that I read about some of the great people in our country who were working in foreign policy. So I think the issue for us going forth is, how do we start to really hold our leaders accountable, as well as the working mechanisms within those organizations to make sure that the promotions are coming about and that we're retaining people at a much higher level. Let me stop there.
Thank you. Let me quickly ask Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley. The executive order last September eliminated federal diversity trainings, including for federal agencies like the State Department. So how would you think that we should begin to fix the damage that was caused by this order and restore minority confidence in agencies like state and USAID?
Yeah, a very important question, Representative Meeks. Thank you for it, Chairman Meeks. It's already begun to be fixed. That was changed, I think, in one of the first executive orders that the administration put out January 20th or 21st. And I will be pretty honest in my opinion that most people understood when it was done by the previous administration that it was done in error. So correcting that mistake has been done, and people understand that it's been done, and taking a hard look at what those trainings are is a good thing. It's always a good thing to review what you're trying to accomplish and how well you're trying to accomplish it. And I think the Department of State can do additional work on that front as well. I did want to return just briefly to your prior question about the retention issue, because I think you've really put your finger on what is most important. The department does a pretty decent job at the recruitment. It is the retention. And as you know, in the department, your promotions come from your evaluations when you are doing a particular job, but your assignments, and it's your assignments that get you promoted and retained, come from your corridor reputation, what people are talking about you in privately, in informal fashions, and who's speaking for you when there are decisions being made about assignments. And one of the challenges in the department is that the assignments process is very opaque. Regardless of what's written in black and white, it doesn't work like that. And I imagine most organizations, there is okay, this is what it says, but this is how it works. And for minorities in particular, women to a certain degree as well, it is getting that knowledge early on. This is how the system works. This is what you need to do to find your sponsor, to find someone who's going to speak for you when the meat market happens and they're handing out assignments. You need to have somebody in the room who's saying, you are the one for this assignment. And a lot of that information needs to be shared, which then takes us to mentorship, which the department has tried from time to time, but it goes back to what Mr. Fulgham said about the metrics and the data and finding out where those mentorship relationships work well, do what we intend them to do, that intentionality. We're not just trying to match people up, we're matching them up for a purpose, for professional development and wisdom to navigate their careers successfully. So I think there's a lot that can be done successfully by the department to improve how we are trying to get after it. And a lot of it comes down to not just putting a program out there, but we are putting it there to do this. Let's judge it. Let's see what the metrics are, and accountable for making sure that it happens.
Thank you so very much. I yield back, Ray.
Thank you so much for our participants. As a reminder, all participants are muted by the moderator. You can unmute yourself when it is your turn to speak by tapping your screen and then tapping the microphone icon that currently has a line through it. Please remain on mute until you are called on to speak by the moderator. Unfortunately, Ranking Member McCall did have to drop off the call, so we will move on to Representative Bass for her question.
Why, thank you. I wasn't expecting to come up so soon. But let me just, thank our chair for doing this hearing and our witnesses for taking the time out. And let me just say that I can't ever remember a time when you talk about diversity where people say, great, welcome, come aboard. Usually when you mention the word diversity, there is immediate resistance that goes up because it is flagging that somebody is winning and somebody is losing. And in fact, I'm taking something from you. And I think we're at a real crossroads within the State Department, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe over the last few years, the State Department has a lot of openings And so to me, if there was ever a time to open up your arms and say, come one, come all, it should be this time. And so I do think it is great to focus on entry level and outreach and all of that. I'm impressed, frankly, that you learned about the Foreign Service from Jet Magazine. That's impressive because, frankly, most people have never heard of the Foreign Service, especially if you are on the other coast. And so I do think that there needs to be a concerted, very deliberative effort to educate the US public about the Foreign Service. But let me just say that I have a bill called Represent America that calls for lateral entry into the State Department, because the problem is that people of color don't stay. And so you get recruited in and you don't stay because the environment is so toxic, it's hostile to you, and you leave. And so you have to be there for many years before you move up. And so one way to address diversity is to address it from the top and the middle and entry level, and to address the environment that leads to people leaving. And so I want to know what your thought is about a lateral transfer, meaning that you've been in the Foreign Service space. You have all of the credentials in the world. Maybe you were working for a think tank or whatever. You have to meet all of the same standards, but you come in as a mid-level person. What are your thoughts about that? And again, I have a bill, a bipartisan bill with my good friend, Representative Shabbat there, that I hope to come before the committee very soon. We voted on it last session, and I hope we vote on it again this session. So any of the witnesses, whichever one, I know I'm getting short on time.
I'd be happy to respond to that. Although you did, good to see you again, Representative Bass. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. And thank you for the great support you gave me when I was director of the Peace Corps.
Sure.
Let me just say that you directed your comments at the State Department in terms of lateral entry. I came into USAID as a lateral entry. I had been working in the private sector. I was working at General Mills as a marketing manager, and then I was selected to work on agribusiness development in Central America. So it was a marvelous opportunity. And AID traditionally has offered opportunities for individuals to come in laterally, and that has helped them in terms of their minority recruitment. So I think that's a very important idea. It's something that I know it's been difficult for the State Department to take on in the past, but I think it's really, really important. The second thing is that retention is all about how much do you pay attention, how purposeful you are in terms of retaining people in the system. First of all, you have to have objectives. The leaders and the managers within any organization need to be aware that they're being measured by their performance on diversity and inclusion. That has to start at the top. And I know that the State Department and at AID, that's going to change very, very shortly. It's already starting to change. Secondly, they need to have access to mentors and sponsors. And I don't mean an artificial structure where somebody is assigned to be your mentor and they have to meet with you because they've been assigned to this task. I mean working through a network and giving people a skill set and the opportunity to find mentors and to find sponsors who will help them find those assignments that Gina talked about in terms of building your career. The other thing is that I believe that minorities who come into the Foreign Service need to be given the opportunity to bid on jobs worldwide, not just in the hardship posts or the unaccompanied posts. They need to be able to give exposure to the top posts where they can develop the skills and have the opportunities to manage complex issues and projects. So that in fact, they can build a base for developing their leadership skills in the future. And the other thing, of course, and this is something that I know you and the other members are concerned about, certainly the chairman and the ranking member is concerned about, and that is the metrics. I recently saw the recent GAO reports on USAID and the State Department, and they're talking about setting up a system to improve the metrics to measure how things are going in terms of diversity and inclusion. Those are some of the elements I believe are important. And certainly, if you opened up the ranks to lateral appointments, that would be outstanding. Then the last thing I'll say is that I learned recently that the latest cohort of Foreign Service officers in AID is one of the most diverse in history. About 70 FSOs, I believe. Of those, 2/3 are women, and over 50% identify themselves as persons of color. My question would be, how did they do that? And let's build on that experience to see how we can shape future cohorts coming into the service. Thank you.
Just one last thing is you need to disaggregate people of color. What does that mean?
I agree. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Bass, for your question. We'll now turn to Representative Liu for his question.
Thank you, Chairman Meeks, for holding this important roundtable, and thank you, Chairwoman Bass, for your great work on issues related to Africa, and thank you to panelists for your public service and time today. I have a question regarding security clearances and assignment restrictions. Over the last few years, my office has received allegations of State Department employees who say they've been denied security clearances or given assignment restrictions based on their ethnicity or national origin. So I have two questions for you. Let's say you're a State Department employee who was born in Kenya, naturalized in the United States. Is there any sort of policy or unspoken policy where the State Department will not assign you to anything related to Kenya? And then my second question is, let's take the same exact example and then add in that you have an uncle who lives in Kenya. Is there any sort of policy or unspoken policy where they will not give you anything related to, for example, Kenya? And if you could answer that, that'd be really helpful.
I'm happy to start and answer. Thank you so much, Representative Liu, for that important question, because I know it is an issue for some Foreign Service officers who bring incredible skills and feel that they're not able to put those skills to use in the countries where they've got the language, where they've got the cultural knowledge and background. My understanding is that the group of people that it is most impactful on are from Eastern Europe. So the Kenya example is an interesting one as well. I did a year in the Board of Examiners, and part of my job was to go over and provide a analysis of and a decision on the suitability of someone applying to be a Foreign Service officer. And all of that, it's different from a security clearance, a suitability clearance, but we signed off on all three, the medical suitability and security clearance. When I came into the Foreign Service, in my class of 52, there was one other African-American male and me, and there was someone whose spouse was from France, someone whose spouse was from England, that was me, and someone whose spouse was from Taiwan. And all of us were initially assigned to those countries, as a matter of fact. Then I heard later on that there was, if you had ties to the country, that they wouldn't assign you to that country. So informally, it seems to change based on, I'm not sure what, but certainly there has not always been a prohibition just because you had personal ties to a country, because I was sent to a country where my husband's entire family was living, and so there was no prohibition. It is something that certainly needs to have a very close eye on, and I would go back to my transparency portion that is so important, because people need to understand exactly why there's any sort of either barrier or prohibition of us serving any place in the world. People need to understand that. But certainly if there was going to be a prohibition or a marker on someone serving in a country, it would be something they would be apprised of before they joined the Department of State. It was something that was done in the clearance process. So not that you got in and you served a couple of places and then decide you want to go somewhere and then someone tells you, no, you can't go. So that is my understanding of it at this point. And my colleagues may have more to add from their own experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Liu, for your question. We will now turn to Representative Chabot for his question.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for getting on here a little bit late. I happen to be one of the co-chairs of the Congressional India Caucus, and the other chair is Brad Sherman, and he and I just got off with a few other members who I see now are on this call as well. So in any event, so I don't have a question per se, but I did want to thank Karen Bass for her leadership in asking me to be co-chair of the legislation HR 7673, which would require that the State Department increase diversity in the Foreign Service through establishing a program that would enable mid-career professionals from underrepresented groups to enter the Foreign Service at mid-level ranks where diversity, unfortunately, may be lacking. And if it's already been talked about it extensively, there's no need to go into it at this point. But if our guests would like to comment on that, or if Karen wants to say anything further on, I'd welcome that as well.
Mr. Chabot?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Gina handled it pretty well. I just want to caution, I think we want to make sure that as we advocate for this type of change, and let me start differently. I benefited from the same things that Aaron Williams did at USAID. I came in laterally to USAID and had a wonderful career. In the State Department, I think we want to make sure that we do no harm. Over the years, they've had mid-level programs that have been semi-successful. I think we need to understand why those programs were unsuccessful. In fact, I knew some of the mid-level officers who came in from the private sector that are similar to Aaron, but they all washed out. I think there's the intent is the right intent to invigorate and incorporate people of color into the Foreign Service, but we also can't set them up to fail. What do I mean by that? They come in for 2 or 3 years, they don't advance, and there's a reason why they're not advancing. There's a certain amount of people that can get promoted each year. Your evaluations decide how you get promoted, and people who've been in for longer are gaming the system and are able to get promoted at a much faster rate. So we also have to look at that process. It's always about the process. It's not the intent, it's the process. And if we don't deal with the process issues in regards to why people are washing out, we're going to do a great thing of bringing a lot of people in and then 5 years from now frustrate them, and then we lose the momentum. So I caution us, if we're going to pass a law, let's make sure we understand the intent and then what we want at the end of that process to ensure that these people are moving through the process, through the system. Excuse me.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add that?
Wait, add one quick thing to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Gina.
I'm going to agree with you, and then I'm going to challenge you on the wording you've used, Alonzo, because
Thanks.
washing out isn't what's happening.
Right.
It is that the building, the culture of the building is unwelcoming.
Welcoming.
And that's what we have to fix.
Right.
So that's when you say that we have to make sure that they're not set up for failure. But that's dealing with the building.
Right.
And we can do that. But it's got to start at the top, and it has to come up from the bottom. We have to work it across the board.
Gina, I would add in, it's not, Gina, I would say it's just not the top and the bottom, it's the middle. It's the gatekeepers. Yeah, it working away. It's the whole system. Yeah, okay, got it. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it has to be seen as being part of the objectives of every leader and manager within the organization. That's the way it's done in the private sector, and in the companies that have had success with diversity and inclusion, it works effectively. We have to have that same level of rigor and determination within the public sector. And the other thing is that we haven't talked about today, and that is you need budgetary resources to carry this out.
Yeah.
If it's merely adding additional work to already burdened managers, and we all know that the Foreign Service is stretched thin right now, and especially given the complexity we face in post-COVID 2.0, whatever 2.0 looks like, we're going to need resources to be able to implement some of these outstanding initiatives that you believe in and want to see used so that we can have a more diverse and inclusive Foreign Service. So I would really plead with you to think about ways that the Congress can provide resources to those who want to actually carry this out, but find themselves in a really difficult situation because of the lack of budgetary resources.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Chabot, for your question. We'll now turn to Representative Wild for her questions.
Thank you so much. My first question is to Madam Ambassador. Madam Ambassador, as a diplomat who has participated in a wide range of groundbreaking assignments, could you speak to the importance of having a diplomatic corps that reflects the diversity of our country, not only in terms of it being in aligned with our national values, I would hope. But also, what is the strategic importance of having a diverse and representative diplomatic corps?
Thank you so much for that question. It has been my personal experience that walking into the room as an African American diplomat has been overwhelmingly positive in my career. That people say, oh, America means what it says. I am that example when I'm representing the United States as a lead negotiator, as a political officer, as consul general, and as an ambassador. That has always been my experience, and the ability to bring others along with me has deepened that experience. I remember after being in Jeddah about 2 years, I realized that at one point in those 2 years, because people rotate through, that I had had a woman or a minority as head of every section in my consulate. And that wasn't all me. I wasn't able to choose everyone that came, because that includes the Foreign Commercial Service, for example, AID, for example. But I know those people wanted to come to Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah, because they realized that there was a place for them. And so my foreign commercial officer at one point was an African-American woman. My head of my consular section was a Hispanic man, and they did great work representing, living the values of the United States. And so as we talk to different countries about their human rights, about the importance of ensuring that 100% of their people, not just 50%, the male part, that can contribute to their nation, that everybody needs that opportunity. We were living those values with women and minorities everywhere and in leadership positions. And I cannot tell you how many times, as a minority American, as you go to countries where there is a diverse population, how welcoming, how uplifting that is. That was my experience. I had women in Saudi Arabia saying, we are so glad to see you. We see you as a leader. That's great. And so I know that increasing our inclusion in the Department of State is going to help us do our jobs better for America. It absolutely will help us do our jobs better. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer. I did have a question for Mr. Williams about the role of the Peace Corps, but I've run out of time. But thank you so very much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Wild, for your question. We will now turn to Representative Allred.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Raven, for doing this. And I want to thank the chairman for convening this, and to our panel. Thank you for your service to our country. My colleagues have mentioned most of the things that I was going to mention or ask. But I wanted to, first of all, just underline the idea that diversity is not just good for the folks who are then allowed to have an opportunity to pursue these roles. It also, of course, brings better and newer and fresher ideas. And as has been mentioned by all of you, I think underscores the success of our system here and its ability, and I think is our strongest export. I wanted to just ask about the Pickering and Rangel fellowships, and ask y'all's opinion on how that worked in terms of getting young African Americans into service, and whether or not other internship type approaches or entry-level ideas that you think we should consider pursuing. And then the other part is something that Chairman Castro has worked on, which is the exit interview process when we do lose someone, particularly those who may feel that their way has been blocked. What that process is like currently? Are we actually collecting the data on what's happening, and do we need to do more to understand why what our retention problems are, and how we're recording that within the government? And y'all can take that in any order you'd like to.
Let me just add to that, Congressman. First of all, thank you for that question. It's absolutely essential. And I'd like to focus for a minute on the Payne Fellows, which is the equivalent of the Rangel scholarships and fellowships at AID. It's been really successful. And again, I would say, as I said earlier, let's find out why it's so successful. One of the reasons it's successful is because it takes away the onerous debt that a young person who strives to serve as a foreign service officer might have to incur to get a master's degree. So that's number one. Number two, it has a really important element to it, and that is providing them with an overseas experience as part of their fellowship. It might be their first exposure to a foreign country. It gives them a chance to operate in that culture, because when you're looking at hiring new people into the foreign service, especially at the junior level, you want people who have the right academic and also experience level. And the Payne Fellows and the Wrangle and the others provide that unique experience. So they are invaluable, in my opinion. The problem is that the cohort is too small. This year, I think there's 15 Payne Fellows. Well, again, going back to that issue of resources, we need to double that if we really want to be serious about it. And we all know that internships are not the answer to everything in terms of diversity and inclusion, but it's a really important cornerstone in building a diverse and workforce and creating that pipeline that you need for the future. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to echo Aaron's comments. I think doubling or tripling the current Payne Fellows is in due. I think that if we really want to increase the diversity capabilities of these institutions, we've got to give them the resources and have them recruit the individuals. One of the things we did in the State Department report, we'd asked for a doubling of the Pickering and Wrangle Fellows, and they've been very, very successful. I don't know if you've had a chance to interview any of these young people, but they're absolutely fantastic. They're fantastic. And I think, as Aaron said, we've got to take that tremendous burden off of them of having to get a master's degree and give them an opportunity to learn while actually earning their master's degree, the craft of being in the State Department and working in that environment. And I think the more opportunities we create, the better pipeline. That's been the big issue for us. The military for years, for Black generals, had an incredible pipeline. And until we create that kind of pipeline in the Foreign Service, which I think Representative Bass is trying to do in her committee, then we'll never get the numbers where we need them to be. The mid-levels is an instrument, but in essence, we need that pipeline. I talked about this earlier. How do we get the universities involved in recruiting and summer internships as well to create this as an avenue and opportunity for success?
I'll just say I had a Wrangle Fellow in my office last term, and he was excellent. So.
Yeah. They are the best and the brightest. That's no hype. They are the best and the brightest.
I'd be remiss if I didn't add one other point. One of the great talent pools that we can tap for the Foreign Service is the United States Peace Corps.
Oh, gosh.
And if we could increase the size and the budget of the Peace Corps, that would give us a ready avenue to bringing people in who already self-select and have the aptitude and the interest and get this valuable experience. And because Peace Corps is a training ground for USAID and the State Department and the rest of the foreign affairs agencies. It's just no doubt about it. I remember when I served in Haiti back in the early mid 80s, 90% of our staff in the embassy and USAID were former Peace Corps volunteers. And that's not unusual in many posts around the world. I felt obviously I had to mention that.
I appreciate it.
But one last point on that, Councilman, I think that Aaron's absolutely right. And that's one of the things I think we need to tell our young people, that if you don't want to do Wrangler or Pickering or Payne, there's also the Peace Corps. I came in through the Peace Corps. And I think we have to open up the plethora of opportunities that if you want to be in the Foreign Service, here are the ways that you can do it, and educate and offer opportunities so that they can find their way in this business.
Well, I appreciate y'all's service and your suggestions here. I'm going to try to see what we can do to support what you're talking about. My uncle was in the Peace Corps as well, and I know it's a good route.
Thank you so much, Representative Allred.
Raven, real quick. Number one, just on that point, the Wrangle Fellows, for example, they've doubled in size, more than they've had. And so we're going to be coming to many of you. We want them to be able to work as fellows in as many members' offices as possible in a bipartisan way. And one thing that they wanted to make sure was that members began to look at these resumes so that we can place them. So we'll be coming to, to all of the members on the committee and to members at large that to please look at and place and take some of these Wrangle Fellows as they are offered. As Congressman Alvin just said, they're fantastic. I try to have one every year. So I want to make sure, especially the new members, know that this is available to you, and we'll make sure that we get that out. And while also, let me just say, I just received notice, the reason that Ambassador Palmer is not with us, he fell ill and has been hospitalized this morning. So let us keep him in prayer. But that's the reason why he's not with us today. Okay, Raven, back to you.
Hey, Chairman Meeks, can I make one more suggestion to you? We also have to figure out a way that allows for us to not only just use Wrangler and Pickering on Capitol Hill, we've got to get them into the National Security Council. You look at Jake Sullivan, 42 years old. He's the National Security Advisor for the United States of America. How do we get young people of color into a position that they can take on that responsibility? I knew Jake when he worked for Hillary as her deputy, and he was allowed to be in the rooms where the decisions were being made and have an opportunity to learn. He's a smart guy, very, very smart guy, affable guy, but he was put in a position to be successful. So if we want to increase the pool, we've got to put people in the right places, and we just need to be a little more imaginative and a little more deliberative about how we want people to be part of this reservoir we're talking about of talent that we need to create so that they're able to take on these responsibilities in the Foreign Service as they go forth.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. We'll now turn to Representative Houlihan for her question.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the really interesting conversation. I'm struck in some ways by the similarities between your jobs and the jobs of those of us who serve in uniform, and the families that are asked to move around and to transfer and transition from place to place throughout the career of the member or the service member. And I was hoping that you might be able to comment, to the degree that you're able to, on what it's like for you all to be able to hold these jobs with your families, and are the families also being supported, particularly, with respect to Black families, to make sure that they feel as though they're welcome as well, and wherever they're being sent to. What is being done for the families to make them feel included?
Well, I'll start. I think we've all had the experience of traveling with families. In many ways, the State Department does a good job with the informal systems they have in place, with someone being your sponsor for your home to get you in your neighborhood, find grocery stores, get your kids in school, etc. That is generally a successful program, although it can depend on the size of the mission. And how well people can be matched based on their family size and composition. So that's in place, but the reality is the greatest support is for the employee, for going in and knowing what they have to do. The job of a consular officer is the same whether it's in London or whether it's in Pretoria, whereas the family trying to integrate into the local society and find schools and a social set is much more challenged. So I think I don't know if more can be done, because I'm speaking from the perspective of the employee. I dare say my husband would have a lot to say on this, but I think the department does a pretty decent job, again, with those informal systems. One of the things that has changed mightily since I started off as a young officer is that we've got the internet and easier communication. I had the privilege this last Saturday of being invited to speak to 2 groups. And so there were over 70 women of color who are US diplomats who tapped in from around the world for a chat with the Diplomatic Sisters in Diplomacy group and Diplo Noir group. And it's just women of color, and some were in different parts of the States, and some were in Africa and Asia, Latin America. And for an hour, it was a great opportunity to talk about challenges, to strategize about solutions. And this is something that, generally speaking, you don't have. So even if you're the only brown person at post, or you're the only woman at post, you have much more connectivity with others like you who you can tap into for advice and counsel. So I think that is a huge, it has nothing to do with the department, it just has to do with technology. But I believe that the support systems, even the informal ones, are stronger than they used to be.
Thank you.
Gentlemen.
I would say, to add to that, Representative, that I would agree with Gina overall, but I think it all depends on who's in charge. It starts at the top. You know, when I was the head of USAID overseas in any mission, I was very concerned about families and the care and concerned about the families. But one of the biggest issues, of course, that we now face, especially with the younger couples coming into the Foreign Service, are these tandem assignments. How do you find sufficient assignments for two equal professionals? That's a real challenge. I imagine it's also the same way in the military. And so that's a challenge, and there's a lot of give and take and a lot of compromise. The other thing that's of concern now about families that we didn't face, Alonzo and Gina and I, early on in our career, the fact is that it's a much less secure environment now. It's a much less permissive environment for Americans serving their country overseas. And so that's another additional challenge that families now have to face that they did not face in the past. And I know the department and USAID are taking steps to address that, but it's a reality, right? And it's another challenge in serving your country overseas, no matter where you are.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to working with you all to try and find ways to be helpful for families, and specifically with this lens of Black and Brown families who are already kind of swimming around in a place where they don't feel as comfortable, the professional, the leading spouse, so to speak, and then to have to also feel like you're trying to figure out how to integrate yourself into a community that isn't necessarily welcoming to you in the beginning has got to be even more of an impetus for the professional, the leading spouse to decide to go somewhere else. And with that, I yield back and thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Houlihan. We'll now turn to Representative Sierra's first question.
Well, thank you, Chairman, for hosting this great interchange here of ideas. I think it's terrific. I have a couple of observations, and I'll just mention them. I think first we have to start destroying this idea of the typical ambassador, the stereotype ambassador. We have to make sure that it's all representative of America. And by that I mean you're supposed to look this way, you're supposed to be this way, you're supposed to be white, you're supposed to be this, we have to destroy that concept, because we're all one nation and we just have to represent the entire nation. The other thing that I have, to me, that's a barrier. The other thing, I was a teacher for 10 years, and in those 10 years, I was in charge of putting together professional days. And I have to say I'm guilty of this. In the professional days that we put together for a school that today is 94% Hispanic, we never promoted the State Department. We never promoted. It's shameful on my part, but I'm older, I'm wiser. And I think we have to not just start at the college level, but you have to start at the high school level to start showing them another path, another avenue for people to get ahead. And Ambassador Gina Winstanley, I got a chuckle out of your story about when you were first and you walked in and they saw that you were an African American and they never seen it. Well, I just shared this story with you. And I'm from New Jersey. There was this small town in my district that I represent. And my chief of staff says, we have to go there because every town is important. Oh, fine, no problem. Well, I was the first Hispanic to represent that district, to represent that town. And they called me to an event. And when I walked in there, it was like shocking that somehow everybody has to be the same. And after I finished speaking and everything else we got out, my chief of staff said, boy, those people, they expected something different. So those barriers are the things that we have to break in order to make sure that people get ahead of the State Department. And I certainly think that we don't do a good enough job in recruiting when we go places and tell people, look, these jobs are available for you. And the other thing, obviously, is the salary and the complaints that I get from some of the people that work at the State Department, that it's very difficult for them to pay for schooling for the kids and everything else. And one final observation is, I don't know whether it's a requirement or not, but being bilingual of any other language, is that a requirement, or is that something that is added to your portfolio that helps you get a job? If anybody wants to.
Yeah, you can come in without a second language if you have scored very, very high on everything else, but you cannot get far without a second language. And having one with fluency will increase your salary coming in. So there's definite benefit to coming in with additional languages. But the Foreign Service Institute trains in 26 languages. That's where I learned my Maltese. And so we will get people additional languages as they need them.
And thanks for your question. I have a couple of observations. I agree that the process by which we select ambassadors needs to change. And I agree that we have to be a little more innovative. I think that we have the United States Agency for International Development, the Department of Commerce, USDA, and individuals in those institutions that are senior foreign service officers, that are also SFS, which is the SES, which is the equivalent of a senior foreign service officer. And why do I say that? As we move forward in the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to look at health diplomacy being a bigger issue with pandemics. You just can't have a really smart political officer going out to country X and trying to explain to a host country ministry as well as the president on how they're going to manage that pandemic. It's not something that's transferable. You need somebody with those types of skills. You've got an agency that has some really, really highly qualified individuals at the right rank that would qualify as an ambassador. I think climate change and water issues in these countries are going to become huge, and they're going to need real responses in real time and individuals who are empathetic to those issues. Urbanization, another major issue, food security. So as we look at the prism of what U.S. ambassadors look like over the next 10 years, I think we have to change that process by how we select them. And I think that there are individuals in these other agencies who could play a major role. The way it's done right now is that the State Department picks its own, and then they leave 4 or 5 jobs that they don't really want, and they tell the other agencies, hey, we've got a job, an ambassador opportunity. That's not the way to do it. We have to be more effective. We have to be more inclusionary. We've got to be more strategic about the types of ambassadors that we're putting in these countries with the knowledge, the working knowledge and understanding of the country, but also of the complexity of the issues that they're going to be dealing with in the future.
Thank you for that. And my final observation is this. I went to a school, I have a graduate degree from Middlebury College. And there were people there recruiting. You know who was one of the most aggressive people recruiting at Middlebury College because of their foreign language schools?
USAID.
The CIA.
Oh.
Yeah, I knew he was going to say the CIA. That's right.
It wasn't the
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They know where to get the top people in languages.
Right. So I mean, I think that says something for the State Department. Maybe they should go and recruit them. I don't know if they do. I don't want to say, but they were aggressive recruiting people over there. Thank you very much for your comments.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Representative Sears, for your question. If we have any other members on the call who would like to ask an additional question, or if our panelists would like to speak further on a topic, Representative Bass, I see your hand raised. We'll turn to you.
Thank you. I again, really appreciate the conversation and just want to go back to the mid-level issue because I'm very concerned. Again, I absolutely agree we need to aggressively recruit at the entry level, but we have a generation that has been raised not with the viewpoint of, I'm going to work on this job for the next 30 years. That's just not a part of their upbringing. I don't think it's going to be a part of the next generation's culture. And so if we are ever going to get people in the middle and upper ranks, we have to look for other ways to do it. And I think you're always going to have situations where people wash out. But instead of looking at the individuals and what happened, I do think, as the ambassador mentioned, we need to look at the culture in the department, because I hear it everywhere I go. And I know that the chairman does too. Sometimes the communication is verbal and sometimes it's nonverbal. But our foreign service folks of color are suffering. And it's not shocking that they don't stay. So I think we have to look at it overall. And we should never look at diversity coming from a point of view of do no harm. I mean, of course, I don't want to do harm, but I think that we have to have a different kind of mindset. And if lateral transfers are done in USAID, there's no reason why they can't be done in the State Department.
Hey, Karen Bass, I don't want folks to misinterpret my comment about do no harm and wash out. My empathy, I agree we need to do this. I'm just saying that we have to really understand the structure, and we've got to break that structure down so that when you do land those individuals in there, they're allowed to move through the process and do it in an effective way. The way that the structure is currently set up, we will have the same problem 5 years from now. I'll bet Super Bowl tickets on it.
So what needs to be done in the structure?
I think I'm not an expert on the structure. From what I understand, and Gina might want to speak to this a little bit more, but once you bring them in at a mid-level, you just can't drop them off.
Absolutely.
There has to be a mentoring process put in place. There also has to be a situation where people who are in that promotion category, so you come in as say you come in as an FS2, which is the next rung before 1. If you come in at FS2, there's a possibility that you may not get promoted for 7 years. And if you know that coming in, are you really going to stay in the Foreign Service? But if you're allowed to competitively compete for a promotion when you come in at the FS2 because of your qualifications, and you now become a part of that pool, then it gives you a chance to compete. There is going to be a lot of pushback for the people who came from 4, 3 to 2 to have this person that just came in this year jump ahead of them and be competitive for the same promotion they thought they were going to get. So you've got some equality issues and an understanding of the system of how we're going to create more promotions in that class potentially, so that it's not you're pushing somebody out who came in at a 4 or 5 and you're disadvantaging him. And that's what I mean about do no harm. We're trying to, I more than anybody else understand what you're trying to do. I think if we're going to have a real State Department that addresses America as we wanted to address it, then these kind of steps have to be taken. But we've got to look at the apparatus and the structure.
So and excuse me for interrupting, but so we need an appropriation strategy along with it, and we need to expand those positions so that we don't do any harm. And so we need to do it from both perspectives, if you follow what I mean.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I think we have to be thoughtful, and we have to make sure that talking to people like Gina, who was a part of the XO board, she understands this backwards and forwards. And here are the things that have to be removed in order for this to have a chance to be successful. That's what I'm worried about. That the intent is there. I'm behind it 110%. But what I want is a positive result at the end of the day.
May I just briefly, one of the things, Representative Bassett, needs to be done is make clear what people who are joining laterally, what they're bringing with them. Part of the problem, and Alonso is absolutely right, is that sense of, I have just worked so hard and I know this stuff back and forth, and here comes a newcomer, here comes an untested, unproven baby to the service, and how can they be better? How can they be better suited than I? Part of that problem is what the building does with regard to educating all of its employees about this lateral system, about what you need to have accomplished even to be considered as a lateral entrant. And it's one of the challenges that we made with regard to the Pickering and Rangels. I'm assuming AID did a better job with Paynes, but it's one of the things that have us lose too many Pickerings and Rangels, that there is this disconnect of what they bring and what the understanding of people who are already in the building, who don't understand how accomplished, what grades, what universities, what languages, what experiences that they bring to the table. And so that is something that the department can do, making sure that they publicize what the requirements are, the lived experiences that are being brought in that are often going to be very similar. If you bring Peace Corps volunteers in, you know, Aaron, you're absolutely right about that. I'm also a former Peace Corps volunteer. People can have international experiences that are analogous, close enough that they're going to be just an absolute no-brainer. Bring them in, by gum, let them go. They're going to do great within the department. But those are the sorts of things that attention needs to be given to as well.
Hey, Ambassador Bass, just one more quick point. Ambassador Bass, if you look at the report that Gina helped put together, the American Academy's recommendations on State Department diversity and inclusion, if you can enact those 13 requests, then the issue that we're talking about in regards to diversity working at the mid-level will become a lot easier. That's what I mean about the apparatus. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Aaron.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First of all, thank you, Representative Bass, for your passion and determination in fighting these issues. These are long-term battles, and you've always been in the forefront. Secondly, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McCall for giving us the opportunity to have this discussion and conversation. This is a sign that things are about to change. And I know we'll have the full support of you and the other members of the committee as this goes forward. So I'm sure I can speak on behalf of my other two colleagues that this has been an important step forward, and we're very grateful to be part of this conversation.
Yep, ditto.
Thank you so much. If any of our panelists would like to say anything, we have a couple more minutes. I don't know, Ambassador Abercrombie Stanley, I'm not sure if you were trying to say something earlier, but just want to make sure that you can say what you needed to say.
I would associate myself with Aaron's comments. This has been a great conversation. It's warming my heart because it is going to take this kind of attention from all parties to really make a difference within the department. We've all alluded to the buildings culture, the buildings resistance, that it isn't all on the political appointees. And so that accountability up and down has got to be put in place. And I'm delighted at the statements from the new administration, the leadership of the department, Secretary Blinken's, firm comments that he's behind this 100%. And then we all have to help him do exactly that. So I'm delighted. I think we have a real possibility for momentum now. A lot of us are counting on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll now turn to Chair Meeks for brief closing remarks.
Thank you, Raven. Let me thank all of the panelists. This has been a marvelous discussion, and I think extremely important. And I thank all of the members who participated also. It seems to me that what we need to do at all levels, number one, we do have to fight for the dollars to follow. As one of the panelists indicated, if the appropriations are not there, so that we could make sure that there's someone that is singularly focused on changing the culture within the building, then it just becomes secondary for somebody else, it seems to me. And so, yes, with the new administration, I agree that we're going to have further dialogue and conversation with them in regard to diversity. But I think that they've got to make sure, and we've got to make sure that there's somebody that is singularly focused and changing the culture in the building, as the ambassador just said. I've seen secretaries of states come and go, and there still seems to be that accountability issue. And I think that what we're going to be driving at, here, and I know that we will be calling people in, and I've got an agreement from Secretary Blinken that members of the State Department will be coming before our committee on an often basis. And one of the questions that we're going to ask whoever comes in and whatever department that they're heading is the question of diversity within their department and what they are doing to make sure that the culture has changed. And that's the kind of dialogue and conversation that we're going to also have with Secretary Blinken. So I just want to thank you so very much. Members of the committee, I know I may very well reach out to you at some other times just to get your thoughts and recommendations so that we can indeed work forward to making America better. And that means the representation at state and USAID as we go around the world is reflective of who and where we are in our great country. So thank you so very, very much for your participation to all the members. And thank you, Raven, for being a great moderator to our briefing. God bless you all.
Thank you, Raven. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, thank you much. See you next time.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Thank you.